We're going to rejoin KRON in San Francisco, our NBC affiliate, in their coverage.
Not more people injured.
This is an amazing structure built back in 1936. Engineers say it could never be duplicated again. We keep hearing talk about building another bridge side by side to take care of the commute nightmare.
Right.
But this is a bridge that in history could only be built once. Here's a freeway that was built, and engineers apparently assuring a lot of people that it was safe. We had no reason to doubt them. But there will be an investigation on this half-mile stretch or mile-and-a-half stretch of I-80, the Cypress overhang or the double-tier freeway.
880. It used to be called Highway 17.
Highway
and
17,
they
the
changed the name
Nimitz,
to
right.
I-880.
Our coverage goes non-stop for you as long as it takes to cover this story. I'm going to take you up to 4 o'clock, and we'll take a look at some of the scenes that San Franciscans live through and that we have seen from time to time. This is the worst. This is the most frightening. And take a close look at this highway overpass. A double-deck highway is now one road. It's a sandwich, and you can see a portion of it standing on the right-hand side of your screen where the upright supports are supposed to be holding this. This is on the Oakland side of the Bay Bridge, and this is where most of the people lost their lives. This is the actual, what they're calling the cantilever section of the Bay Bridge, where a section fell down. This looks to me like immediately after the quake or during the quake, when there was a great deal of confusion. You can see quite a bit of damage to houses on the left-hand side of your screen. That probably was a two-story house reduced to one. Another one that had heaved off the foundation there, a wood frame home. Here is a rescue effort to try to save a person who was trapped in the rubble of some collapse in San Francisco. The death toll, as we've been telling you, has risen and fallen according to various reports. The latest from the Highway Patrol is that 250 people died in that collapse of the freeway, Interstate 880 in Oakland. And there are other deaths as well. There are deaths in building collapses in San Francisco itself. There was one case where a building, an old unreinforced masonry building made of brick, collapsed and fell on top of a number of cars, and 6 people were crushed to death. There was one area of particular concern near the wharf area in San Francisco, near Fisherman's Wharf, and that you saw there where the fire broke out because of natural gas lines that had ruptured, and some spark or another set them off. And then, of course, they had difficulty getting enough water to suppress the fire, so there was a lot of concern that many of the old wood frame buildings in that area would catch one by one and the fire would spread. Although, as I've told you earlier, they have got that under control now, apparently. This is interior damage. Now, you think in terms of exterior damage in many cases. This is the San Francisco airport, and you can see many of the ceiling tiles fell down. They wouldn't tend to do serious damage to somebody, but they could certainly cause a bit, and that was a grim scene we saw right there. A person obviously deceased in the rubble of a collapse in San Francisco. The quake struck at 5 San Francisco time yesterday.
We're going to Anthony Moore and Tom DeVries right now. They are standing by where a massive rescue effort is underway near the 880 freeway, what was once the 880 freeway.
Well, Bob, we're standing about a block and a half to 2 blocks further from where I did my last report. While Tom was en route, we were basically kicked off the command center area along with the rest of the media. They've marshaled us here, and they've told us that they're going to have some kind of statement soon, but they haven't. Behind us is the devastation that you have seen all evening, the cantilevered expressway, just the top tier falling on to the middle tier. And we just saw a large crane coming by, came right by us, a 165-foot beam, it said on the crane, the largest in the United States. So clearly the construction effort is working to try and perhaps prop this up to keep it from falling further if there are any aftershocks. Now, Tom DeVries, East Bay correspondent, has been on that middle area, that middle cantilever, right after the earthquake happened. And Tom, you want to describe for us the kinds of things you saw?
It was the cars that had been on the upper level of the 880 freeway, of the Nimitz. In other words, they had been headed south toward the main part of Oakland and the airport and so on, were by and large thrown off the freeway. There were very few cars left up, but when we first got here at 5:15 in the afternoon, we found cars and trucks in the street. Many victims being pulled out or extricated from the mashed up vehicles that were both on the top and on the street. The bigger problem was that the amount of concrete that fell down in the northbound part of the Cypress structure and squashed the cars in between, and they are still looking. We saw dogs being brought in. Anthony and I both saw dogs being brought in to help find the victims, although, as Jerry McCune, our photographer, points out, there's been so much fire in between the two parts of the freeway, it would be difficult even for a dog, I think, to find the victims. There are very few victims. Now, at the first couple of hours, the first hour and a half, we saw a lot of people taken out. I was just over at the medical section over here at the triage center. They're sitting around waiting, drinking coffee and soda pop and waiting for victims to come out. There are very few victims evident.
That's right. It's fair to say that the rescue effort is being done in a massive scale, but individual victories are very small. We earlier this evening were able to see one victory. This is not far from where we're standing now. About 8 o'clock tonight, just as we arrived, you can see this van obviously crushed by the pylon that fell down. It may in fact have fallen off from the top. In the upper right-hand corner of your screen, an upturned bus. Now, I don't know if we're going to take some of this, but this is, well, I guess we won't. Anyway, the devastation seems to be very large, but as you say, Tom, you can't really tell if there were that many people that were trapped up there, and certainly the number of victims is left in the air right now.
There's an enormous effort now to lift the concrete section and to work around between the two sections of roadway that collapsed, leaving about 2 feet of space in many of areas, trying to find people, trying to find the cars, and then trying to find out if there's still people in them. They're tagging the cars, they're working one from the next. As I said, they're trying to use dogs now to see whether they can find people in there. This is a very difficult effort. It's going to be several days then, I think, before they finally find out what the true cost of the Cypress structure collapse has been.
And one of the reasons that they have pulled us so far away from the structure itself is because it is so precarious. As we said earlier, that 2-inch thick rebar is the only thing holding those pylons from that one section from just falling right over. Right now, that's all we can say. We really don't have any handle on the number of victims or potential victims in there. The screams that we were told of earlier, I guess,
it's been very quiet.
Yeah, have died down. There hasn't been anything like that recently, and we haven't seen anybody taken out. But clearly the rescuers are still looking for potential victims in there, and they will be for the rest of the night.
All right, both of you, Tom and Anthony, we thank you very much for that report. We'll add that just a little while ago, we did report for the first time that at 11:40 p.m. this evening, 2 children were rescued from one of the cars that was smashed on that 880 interchange there. And their parents, from the same car apparently, their parents were found to be dead, but the 2 children were rushed to Alta Bates Hospital.
There was one woman who was trapped inside that very building for some 2 hours. She had a door on top of her, and they didn't find her until very, very late in the game. By then, there was a gas cloud inside that building. They could not go in with the jaws of life to try and get the door off her. They had to cut it off by hand because the jaws of life might have touched off some of the gas that was in there. It might have caused an explosion. A devastating scene in the Marina, a swath of destruction that was cut essentially from the northwestern corner of the Marina district down to the southeastern corner with buckled sidewalks and the devastating fire that we just saw on these collapsed buildings. Back to you, Bob and Suzanne.
Well, the thing that is most curious, Wilson, if I can hold you there, is the situation that firefighters found themselves in.
They got here,
right, that they didn't have any water.
They got here with plenty of equipment. Yeah, lots of equipment. They got here with plenty of equipment, and when they tried to turn on the water mains, there was simply no water pressure. What had happened was that the same devastating jolt that had broken the gas mains had also broken some of the major water mains feeding this area. What they finally had to do was bring in the San Francisco fireboat Phoenix and use pumpers to draft water out of the bay and fight the fire much longer afterwards than they would like to have if they'd had water pressure here originally. It took them a long time to get water on this blaze.
One had to wonder whether that was sort of a last-minute maneuver, or was the Phoenix part of the contingency plan?
The Phoenix is always a part of the contingency plan, but the question is where it's going to be used. If there had been another fire, let's say south of Market, and they had committed the Phoenix to that area, my best guess is that this entire block west of Divisadero, between here and Broderick, and from Beach all the way up to Jefferson, probably would have burned. That fire was leaping roofs, and if the fireboat Phoenix had not been available to fight this fire, if it had been committed somewhere else, this thing would have been much worse than it was.
All right, thank you. Wilson Van Alst for your fine report. The pictures we're about to show you is the devastation from the quake that we have seen today. Pictures worth showing over and over again, merely because these are pictures we never expected to see here in the Bay Area. Some hoping not in their lifetime anyway. This is that portion of the cantilever section of the Bay Bridge that collapsed, a portion of the upper deck falling on the lower deck. You see 2 cars involved. This was the nightmare. This was the Cypress section of 880 that collapsed. It literally rippled, and a lot of those supports, as you can see, just buckle like pretzels, and the top part of the freeway came down, smashing cars in the middle. So far, 50, we are hearing more than 50 dead, although Anthony Moore and Tom DeVries, who are covering that story right now, say that the officials will be updating that shortly. This is a fire in the Marina, 3 known dead here. There was a collapsed building, and this very, very hot, very, very stubborn 5-alarm fire in which fire people here had very, very difficult time putting out or keeping contained, because for a time they didn't have any water. They had to marshal in the forces of the Phoenix that was literally siphoning water out of the bay to fight this fire. And what you're seeing here is a building collapse, actually a wall that killed 5 people at 6th and Brannan. Santa Cruz, buildings, road damage. We have reports virtually from just about every part of the Bay Area, some worse than others, but this is generally the scene throughout the Bay Area tonight as people are going to bed, waking up tomorrow to see more of this. Streets ajar, the earth literally moving beneath their feet, and it was a very, very scary situation, believe me.
There's a major crack in Highway 17 over the Summit Road, and that was the crack you were seeing there. Again, I understand that a portion of Highway 17 up at the summit is still closed to traffic.
You're looking now at videotape of the biggest, most major fire that occurred in the Marina area of San Francisco. It has been burning throughout the night. It is still burning, we're told. The fire, of course, equipment has been on the scene for some hours there. In addition to this fire, there have been other smaller fires throughout the Oakland and the San Francisco area. There have been reports of collapsed buildings. And again, the major structural damage appears to have been on Highway 880, where the upper deck collapsed onto the lower deck along a period or a placement of about 1.5 miles. A number of casualties reported there. There were trouble there at the Oakland Bay Bridge. You can see there where the upper deck collapsed, falling down to the lower deck. The lower deck held, did not give way into the water. As bad as that situation looks, and it is bad, there's some reports that they think they can open 1 or 2 lanes there in the next day or two. That, of course, a major artery between the Oakland area and the San Francisco area. Again, we're looking at the fire situation there in the San Francisco area. This quake is said to be the second most serious to hit the United States in our history. The other one, of course, in San Francisco, the famous earthquake there, the tragic earthquake of 1906 that registered 8.3 on the Richter scale when about 700 people died. This quake that occurred 8 hours ago in the San Francisco area, centered near Santa Cruz, about 75 miles south of San Francisco, registered 6.9, on some scales 7 on the Richter scale, again causing widespread damage throughout the city. There's been some concern, as we have heard this morning, and some worry that there should not have been this much damage, because for a long time that area has been known to be earthquake prone, and a lot of attention has been given to construction in the area to try to make it as earthquake-proof as possible. You're looking now at more scenes of destruction in the San Francisco, the Oakland Bay area. Again, the World Series was to have been played, Game 3 of it last night. It, of course, was canceled. There were about 60,000 people in Candlestick Park at the time of the earthquake. Television coverage on ABC of that game, of course, was knocked out right at the very beginning. There was an orderly situation there at the ballpark as 60,000 people streamed out, heading for their homes, hotels, and what have you. Massive traffic jams. Some people still have not been able to get home because of the many roads that were blocked off. So again, our situation is we are following this story, still unfolding because of communications. About 1 million people without power, electricity, gas, and telephones in the area. That hopefully will be restored in the next few hours.
Anthony?
Well, Bob, the fire department has been moving slowly but surely all along the top 2 spans of the highway that collapsed. Clearly, they're looking for any survivors, anybody who might be able to be rescued before they go to the longer process of cleaning up here. At one point, listening to radio chatter, I understood there was nothing more than a 3 feet difference between the top and the bottom spans of those things. So what you're looking at behind me is where clearly there's a lot more space than some of the other sections. It could be a mile to a mile and a half long. One of the people who was first on the scene, like many people, was just a citizen on the street who heard the disaster and was able to respond first, and that's Darius Brewer. Come on over here, Darius. Now, Darius had, apparently you were up in there, Darius, on that middle section for quite some time. Tell me what you saw when you walked up there.
Okay, the first time we went up there, it was a guy in a white car, very bad, crashed under the car. We tried to get him out, and we couldn't force the car to try to get him out, period. So we tried to lift him off of it. Only part of the side of him was his chest was covered, but his left and his right arm was free. I mean, left hand and left leg was free.
So he was alive.
Yeah, he was alive.
You were able to bring him out.
We wouldn't be able to bring him out. We would only lift the car a little bit off of him so he can have more chance to breathe into his chest.